There is a category of weapon that military historians rarely discuss in public, not because the evidence is thin, but because the evidence is inconvenient. What Japan developed between 1943 and 1945 for use against American strategic bombers falls squarely into that category. It was not a fighter plane, it was not a surface-to-air missile. It was a device engineered specifically to destroy the human eye at 30,000 feet, and the research behind it was funded by the Imperial Japanese Army, tested on living prisoners, and then quietly absorbed into classified files that an American general chose not to prosecute. This is that story. By the summer of 1944, Japan faced a problem that had no elegant solution. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced long-range strategic bomber the world had ever seen at that point, was conducting raids on the Japanese home islands from bases in the Mariana Islands with an operational ceiling that put it well beyond the reach of most Japanese interceptors. The Mitsubishi A-6M0, the Nakajima Ki-43, the Kawasaki Ki-61, none of them could reliably reach and sustain combat at 27,000 to 30,000 feet, which is where the B-29 crews preferred to operate. Japanese anti-aircraft artillery was effective below 20,000 feet, but became increasingly unreliable above that threshold. The Americans knew this. The B-29's entire design philosophy banked on it. So the Imperial Japanese Army Technical Bureau, specifically the 6th Technical Research Division based in Noborito, outside Tokyo, was tasked with finding an asymmetric solution. Not a faster plane, not a better gun. Something that attacked the bomber's crew directly, at the moment of their highest concentration, during a bomb run. The answer they arrived at was fire. Not fire in the conventional sense of burning an aircraft's airframe that required proximity and accuracy that Japanese interceptors increasingly could not guarantee. The concept they developed was more targeted than that, a weapon designed to introduce blinding incendiary material into the visual field of a bomber crew at the precise moment the aircraft was locked onto its target. During a bomb run, a B-29's bombardier was prone, face pressed to the Norden bomb site, eyes fully adjusted to the optical system, pupils dilated in the low interior light of the aircraft. A sudden introduction of white phosphorus combustion directly into that optical environment, even through the aircraft's glazed nose, could render a bombardier permanently blind in seconds. The physical chemistry is not complicated. White phosphorus ignites at 30 degrees Celsius and burns at approximately 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. It cannot be extinguished by smothering. It adheres to organic material, including the cornea of the human eye, and continues burning until it consumes all available oxygen or the fuel source is physically removed. In a pressurized cockpit at altitude, with limited ability to move and zero ability to open a window, exposure to even a small quantity of burning white phosphorus near the face was effectively a sentence of permanent blindness and, in most cases, death from secondary combustion of flight suit materials. What the Noborito engineers designed to deliver this effect was a two-part system. The first component was an airborne dispersal variant of the existing Type 100 flamethrower, a weapon already in Japanese inventory that had seen use in ground operations across the Pacific. The original Type 100 was a backpack-carried system weighing roughly 23 kilograms, capable of projecting a stream of burning oil-based fuel approximately 25 to 30 meters. The airborne variant the engineers proposed was not a direct-fire weapon. It was a proximity burst system, a canister designed to be deployed from a Japanese interceptor at close range, above or slightly ahead of a B-29 inches its bombing approach, releasing a cloud of burning phosphorus-impregnated particles that would drift downward and forward into the bomber's flight path. The second component, and this is where the engineering becomes genuinely disturbing, was the GO-18 incendiary cluster configuration. The GO-18 designation appears in fragmentary post-war intelligence documents captured from the Noborito facility and later cataloged by American occupation forces. It was a cluster munition roughly 60 centimeters in length and 15 centimeters in diameter, containing between 40 and 60 individual phosphorus submunitions, each approximately the size and shape of a rifle cartridge. The dispersal mechanism used a small central bursting charge, timed to function at a preset altitude, scattering the submunitions across a roughly 30-meter radius. At the center of each submunition was a compressed white phosphorus core, surrounded by a thin metallite casing designed to shatter on low-velocity impact, including impact with glass or thin aluminum sheeting, the exact materials used in B-29 nose glazing and cockpit windscreens. The weapon was not designed to destroy the aircraft. It was designed to destroy the people inside it, while the aircraft remained intact, which, from a Japanese military perspective in 1944, had a specific strategic logic. A B-29 that dropped its bombs wide due to a blinded bombardier was nearly as valuable as a B-29 destroyed outright. And the psychological effect on American aircrews of knowing that Japanese interceptors were deploying a weapon capable of blinding them through their own cockpit glass that had its own calculus. Development testing of the GO-18 configuration began in late 1943 at the Tama Army Technical Laboratory in Tachikawa, using instrumented drop tests to measure dispersal patterns and submunition penetration against B-29 equivalent glazing samples. The engineering data from those tests, according to documents reviewed by American military intelligence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, who entered Japan, GO-18 achieved adequate penetration of aircraft-grade plexiglass at dispersal velocities consistent with a high-altitude airdrop. Sanders' mission, officially designated to investigate Japanese biological weapons programs, ran directly into overlapping evidence of the incendiary crew blinding research. His preliminary report, filed in October 1945, noted the connection between the Noborito facility's incendiary work and the broader Unit 731 research network in Manchuria, specifically the use of prisoner subjects to validate the weapon's effects on human vision. Sanders recommended prosecution. He also recommended that the technical files be preserved for war crimes proceedings. Neither recommendation was fully acted upon. What the documents suggest and what post-war testimony from Japanese technical personnel partially corroborates is that live subject testing of the GO-18 and the Type 100 airborne variant was conducted at a facility in northern Kyushu sometime in late 1944. The subjects were American airmen. The number given in the fragmentary records ranges between 7 and 12 individuals. The testing was not designed to be survivable. The purpose was to confirm blinding effect timelines, specifically how many seconds of exposure to dispersed white phosphorus at simulated altitude conditions produced irreversible corneal destruction versus temporary incapacitation. That distinction mattered to the engineers because a temporarily incapacitated bombardier who recovered partial vision before bomb release was less operationally useful as a result than a permanently blinded one. They measured this on human beings with stopwatches. If you have studied Japanese weapons research from this period, the full scope of what Unit 731 conducted in Manchuria, the plague bomb field tests, the frostbite experiments at Harbin, then the methodology described above, is not surprising. It is consistent. What is different about the Kyushu incendiary testing is the specific strategic focus. This was not basic science. This was applied weapons validation. The engineers needed data that no animal model could provide, because no animal model could tell them whether a human bombardier, under combat stress, in a pressurized aircraft environment, would lose targeting accuracy within 15 seconds of exposure or within 45. That granularity required human subjects. The data, as far as surviving documents indicate, confirmed the weapon's effectiveness within the parameters the engineers needed. Would you have opened those files if you were MacArthur's staff in late 1945, knowing that prosecution meant putting Japanese scientists on trial who had just spent 2 years generating aeronautical weapons data the U.S. Air Force found genuinely useful? That question does not have a clean answer, and the historians who have looked at it most carefully. Hal Gold, Sheldon Harris, Unit 731 researcher, Keiichi Tsuneshi, have arrived at conclusions that are uncomfortable for both governments involved. Tell me in the comments where you stand on that exchange, because the argument about what MacArthur knew versus what he chose to act on has never been settled. Operational deployment of the GO-18 system against actual B-29 formations is where the record becomes genuinely difficult to read. American mission reports from the 20th Air Force, the command responsible for B-29 operations against the Japanese home islands, document a small number of incidents between late 1944 and mid-1000, 945 inches, which aircrew reported unusual incendiary effects during pointed Japanese interceptor attacks that did not match the signature of conventional cannon or rocket fire. A mission report dated March 1945 from the 73rd Bombardment Wing, operating from Saipan, describes an engagement over Honshu, in which a B-29 returned to base with the Bombardier Station, showing evidence of small-caliber phosphorus burns on the interior of the nose glazing and on instrument surfaces, with the bombardier himself suffering partial flash burns to the face and temporary vision impairment. The official classification of that incident was anti-aircraft shell fragment with incendiary filler. The bombardier's name was not recorded in the declassified portion of the report. 3 other incidents in the same operational period share a similar profile: localized phosphorus burns on nose or cockpit glazing, crew vision complaints, no corresponding impact damage consistent with cannon shell penetration. None of these incidents were flagged for technical intelligence follow-up during the war. They were categorized, filed, and largely forgotten in the administrative machinery of a command that was processing thousands of mission reports per month during the height of the strategic bombing campaign. The Type 100 airborne dispersal variant never reached mass production. Japanese industrial capacity by early 1945 was collapsing under the weight of American naval blockade and the bombing campaign itself. The aluminum and specialty chemical inputs required for the GO-18 submunition casings were increasingly unavailable. The Noborito facility shifted priorities toward balloon bomb production, the Fugo program, which sent incendiary and fragmentation payloads across the Pacific via jet stream, and the crew-blinding research was effectively shelved in favor of weapons that could be manufactured with available materials. But shelved is not the same as destroyed. When American occupation forces entered the Noborito facility in September and October 1945, they found a partially demolished laboratory complex. Japanese personnel had burned a significant portion of the documentary record in the final weeks before surrender, a pattern consistent with what was found at Unit 731's Pingfang facility in Manchuria, where the destruction of evidence was systematic and deliberate. What remained at Noborito was fragmentary. Technical drawings, without accompanying research logs, material samples, without provenance documentation, and a series of photographic prints, their content described in Sanders' report, but not reproduced in the declassified version that documented the results of what the caption identified only as exposure trials. MacArthur's headquarters formally classified the Noborito technical files in early 1946. The classification rationale given in the administrative record was standard occupation security boilerplate. No specific justification was provided for why the incendiary crew-blinding research warranted the same classification treatment as the nuclear physics materials captured from Japanese university laboratories. The scientists who led the GO-18 program, their names, appear in fragmentary form in Sanders' report and in a 1949 U.S. Army Chemical Corps assessment of captured Japanese chemical and incendiary research were not prosecuted at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. Several of them appear in post-war Japanese industrial and academic records in positions that suggest continued work in chemical and materials engineering. At least one is linked, through corporate lineage, to a post-war Japanese defense contractor that maintained research ties with American military procurement offices through the 1950s. The Tokyo Tribunal, which ran from May 1946 through November 1948 and resulted in the conviction of 25 Japanese military and political leaders, did not include charges specifically related to the airborne incendiary anti-personnel weapons program. The tribunal's indictment structure focused heavily on command responsibility for conventional atrocities, the Nanjing Massacre, the Bataan Death March, the treatment of Allied prisoners in fixed camps, and on the biological warfare program associated with Unit 731, which was itself ultimately excluded from prosecution through a separate agreement between General MacArthur and the Japanese researchers who agreed to hand over their data. The incendiary crew blinding program occupied a space between those two categories, too specific and too technical for the conventional atrocity charges and too peripheral to the core biological research to be swept into the Unit 731 immunity agreement. It fell through the procedural gap between them. Not prosecuted, not exonerated, simply not addressed. There is a detail in the fragmentary Kyushu testing records that does not appear in any official summary document. It surfaces only in a handwritten marginal notation in one of the surviving Noborito engineering logs, a note added by a junior researcher whose name is partially legible. The notation reads, in translation, "Subjects required restraint after second application, visual confirmation of effect achieved at 40 seconds. 40 seconds. From first exposure to confirmed blindness." That number 40 seconds was what the engineers needed. That was the threshold that told them the weapon worked as designed during the critical window of a B-29 bomb run, which from initial target acquisition to bomb release typically ran between 30 and 90 seconds, depending on conditions. The weapon worked. The records confirm it worked. The men who built it faced no legal consequence for the process by which they confirmed it worked. In 1947, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps produced a classified assessment of captured Japanese incendiary research that referenced the GO-18 program by designation and summarized its technical parameters. That document remained classified until a partial declassification in 1998 under the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, which, through an administrative quirk, also triggered partial release of certain Imperial Japanese weapons research files held by the Army. The released version was heavily redacted. The section covering the Kyushu human trials was removed entirely, replaced by a single line. Details pertaining to human subject research have been withheld under statutory exemption. The full, unredacted version of that assessment has never been publicly released. There are 11 names in the surviving Noborito personnel records associated with the GO-18 project. 7 of those names have been cross-referenced by independent researchers against post-war Japanese civil records. 4 of the 7 lived well into old age. 1 died in 1989. 1 died in 1993. The most senior engineer on the project, a man whose name appears on the original Type 100 airborne variant design drawings, died in Tokyo in 1981 at the age of 78, having spent 3 decades working as a consultant for a major Japanese electronics firm. He was never asked, in any official proceeding, what happened in northern Kyushu in 1944. The file MacArthur sealed in 1946 is still only partially open. The 40-second threshold is still in there somewhere, buried in a redacted line of a 1947 assessment sitting in a records box in a federal archive, waiting for a researcher with enough clearance and enough patience to pull the complete file. Nobody has pulled it yet.